This review is for a mature rated game and discusses mature themes. Viewer discretion is advised. The release of Silent Hill on the PlayStation in 1999 certainly showed that survival horror didn't have to be limited to the Resident Evil series at the very least. More to the point, it was a good example of psychological horror. With the, at the time, high anticipation of the PlayStation 2, there was a chance for the developers to do things they otherwise couldn't on the preceding hardware. They also focused on the story first, as the setting of the title town from the first game was familiar enough. The story is also not that of a direct sequel, focusing on everyman James Sunderland receiving a letter from his wife Mary which says to come to Silent Hill. But she's dead. That's just the first out of several conundrums and scares that may change James and even you, the player, should you make it out of that foggy town alive. Those of you who have played the first game will surely feel right at home with Silent Hill 2, even with the technological advancements. The use of fog in this game is not necessarily born out of hardware limitations like the previous game was, yet it makes for tense exploration of the eerie town. What is especially impressive is the lighting. The shadows of James and other characters and enemies grow and shrink depending on the position and direction of your flashlight. There are even moments where it will be too dark to read your map, something you will do frequently if you need to know or remember the doorways to go through. Even with the appropriately dark lighting, you may want to turn up the brightness to see better, which was done even for this review footage. Then again, doing so may show that the graphics are not the best on the PlayStation 2. Even with the dirty, dark and dusty environments, and especially the CG cutscenes that were promoted as true to life, the graphics have not necessarily aged well, though they are certainly better than those of the first game. Another similarity from the first game is the quality of the sound, right down to the extensive catalogue of sound effects, including footsteps and quite meaty gunshots. In fact, much of the sound, including clanging, banging and drawn-out droning, is quite unsettling and sends chills down the spine, especially if you're listening through headphones during the night, which is sometimes the only time during a day a reviewer like myself gets to play games, including horror games. The music is good too, and is similar to the first game in its cold industrial tones. Some of it is also quite emotional and sad. In fact, sad combined with upbeat is the best way to describe the main theme. As befitting the title, however, the moments where the sound shines are where it's, well, silent. It's chilling. These qualities don't extend to the voice acting, which, while easily better than the first game, is far from exceptional.
Lost?
But don't tell Rachel, okay?
Who's Rachel?
With lines that sound a bit too funny for a horror game.
This town is full of monsters. How can you sit there and eat pizza?
What about the gameplay? Well, it's very similar to the first game, which means it generally consists of exploration, combat and puzzle solving. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but each aspect has its good and bad points. There are sections where exploring the town and its interiors feel like padding, especially if you get lost. Still, you are generally given a good indication of where to go next, and even then, you will find plenty of items such as health items and ammo. James will also look over at any items he sees, which may distract you. But nothing wrong with getting extra ammo, right? Well, actually, it feels like there are too many ammo and health items, meaning that combat-wise, this is probably one of the easier games in the Silent Hill series. You can actually choose the difficulty level of the enemies and the puzzles when starting a new game. The puzzles are generally challenging brain teasers, complete with creative item uses and combinations, though they are sometimes illogical, so you may just want to play on the easy puzzle difficulty. But the challenge is there if you want, which affects the solutions and the wording of the riddles. Now back to the combat, and the way you move around. You use tank controls just like in the first game, which means you press up to move James in the direction his head is facing. There is an alternative control type in the options menu, which relies less on tank controls. This is probably good for beginners, but the tank controls somehow feel better and are appropriate for the vulnerability you're meant to feel. The camera also contributes to that, in that the deliberately disorienting and even weird angles can result in you going in wrong directions. Pressing L2 on the controller can make the camera less of an issue. The radio is back from the first game, and sounds better too, which emits static when enemies are nearby even if you can't see them. Now that's a horror challenge. But the aforementioned abundance of items does make for a lack of challenge in overcoming enemies. Due to the camera and controls, not to mention the unsettling nature of what goes on, including a rumble feature on the controller that represents James' heartbeat after taking a lot of damage, you might die on a higher difficulty level, but you will likely have too much ammunition to shoot with, not to mention the option just to simply avoid combat a lot. The bosses are relatively easy too. However, in contrast to the previous game, they are more relevant to the story, not there just for the sake of it or to be a transition between level or gameplay sections. And they look very creepy, including the recurring boss, Pyramid Head, who you may have heard of if you haven't even indulged in the series. The enemies look creepy too, partially due to their more human appearance. So, these enemies are not really much of a challenging threat, and that doesn't make the game as scary as it probably should be. However, it's really in the story department where Silent Hill 2 makes up for that. There's quite a bit to discuss here. The cryptic storytelling and use of symbolism from the first game are back in fine form, with references to pop culture such as David Lynch's Blue Velvet and Twin Peaks being more prevalent and noticeable than before. The depth of the story is difficult to cover here succinctly, to the point of anyone's interpretations being different, including the symbolism of Pyramid Head and more. But here goes. The narrative of James uncovering the truth behind his dead wife Mary is not the only one you see, though it's certainly the main drive. Other characters have their own problems, with a possible exception of the innocent little girl Laura, and just like James, go to the town deliberately rather than visit it by accident. With characters like Eddie and Angela, mature topics are a heavy focus, including but not limited to depression, grief, bullying,
Till now I always let people walk all over me.
insecurities, suicide, mental health, and abuse that is sexual, domestic, physical, and mental.
Well, you could just force me. Beat me up like he always did.
A character that is especially notable is Maria, whose looks and voice resemble Mary, except she is more aggressive and seductive.
Do I look like your girlfriend?
It is up to your interpretation what her presence and role in the story are about. You will come across many conundrums and contradictions where you will question not just the symbolism, but what's going on. Could Mary actually be alive and waiting? Going further and further into the game to try and answer that question will make for a psychological horror experience that will surely get under your skin and leave you staring silently at the screen as the ending and credits occur, maybe with feelings of hopelessness and emptiness. The gameplay does contribute to this, so it's not just cutscenes. One section of the game has James literally, is it literally? Going through a series of holes. How far do you go? Why is it that this door leads to somewhere completely different? Where am I going? What's happened to the camera angle? You don't visit the other version of the town known as the Otherworld as much as you do in the previous game, but make no mistake, the manifested psychics of the characters make this place no safer than before. Speaking of the ending, there are multiple ones just like before, but the conditions to unlock them are more vague than usual, to the point of choosing to examine one certain item meaning you may have to start the game again if you want to see a different result. Then again, this, combined with not just one but two categories of difficulty levels, give the game replay value. It doesn't matter that it's a short game, probably longer than the first one but still short, but does it matter that this game is not necessarily challenging, with a possible exception of certain moments of exploration, puzzle solving and combat? Maybe. The gameplay is good, but the main reason you should probably get Silent Hill 2 is for the story. It has memorable, emotional moments. This is a story that you unnerve as you do the exploration yourself, but more importantly, it is presented very well and is not afraid to explore such mature themes.
Don't come back. James. Wait. Please don't go. Stay with me. Don't leave me alone. I didn't mean what I said.
As silly as this may sound, it is not for the faint-hearted, especially if you want to play over and over again to see the multiple endings or any other pieces of storytelling you may have missed. It is more depressing than scary, but it can be argued that this is a great case of psychological horror, essentially little to no jump scares, thank goodness. The slight lack of challenge and somewhat better controls means this is a good entry point for those new to the Silent Hill series. Even then, those who played the first Silent Hill before, which is a good game, will not be disappointed. If you can, try to get the original PlayStation 2 release, because the HD release is, according to my research, the less said about it the better. Well, I'm trapped in Silent Hill, and quite possibly a second time too. Can someone help me? Should you?
Well then, everybody, thanks for tuning in. See you again sometime.